back, and then the lady in front of you.
Okay, and I wanted to raise a question for Ola. There were some very interesting points you made in your presentation. There's a very clear defense of capitalism. But I felt some of the points, they really kind of didn't match the reality of the world as we've seen it over the last few years. So you talked about the level of regulation in the financial industry, and at the same time you also talked about the subprime mortgage crisis. Was a situation where thousands of people in America and elsewhere were lent money that they couldn't hope to pay back. And that's what really kicked the crisis off, is that first of all, you're dealing with people, you have an example, maybe a janitor and a cleaner, one of the very clear examples, with no assets, being loaned enough money to buy a $400,000 house. Now, obviously, that's storing up a massive problem when you're lending to people who don't have the money, and then you take those same loans, turn them into assets, and re-loan them out again and say that they're AAA rated financial products. So, where was the regulation? Where was all those incredibly intelligent people you talked about in the financial industry? I think everyone's asking, if these people are so intelligent, why have they created such a huge crisis for the world?
Okay, we got the question now,
okay, so if I just ask the question.
I thought you did.
Yeah, so what I think, if I could ask Ola to respond to the point about equity finance. So I don't think we're saying in the Islamic system you have no models of loans or lending. But what you do have is risk sharing in the lending that takes place. So if people loan money to businesses, at the same time they are taking on a share of the risk involved. And that's where that level of responsibility comes in, where the investor and the business owner are actually sharing the risk and sharing the reward.
Okay, thank you. And the lady...
Okay, yeah, I have a question. You talked about the gold standard.
Can you speak a bit louder, please?
Yeah, sorry. I have a question about the gold standard. It's not a new idea. It happened before and then it got replaced. Also, so how was this different? How is this a new idea? And also, are you not replacing gold with money? Because gold also increases and decreases in value. So how is this an alternative?
Okay, thank you. Put your hands. I can't respond to everyone at once, so let's let these questions be answered, then we have another chance. So, Ola, you've got the paradox between regulation and what happened to the subprime market, and then a supplementary question about equity finance.
Okay. The first question from the gentleman there has to do with subprime mortgage crisis. Yes, subprime mortgage crisis happened because banks were lending money to a group of people we call ninja. No income, no job, no assets. So they were just getting money anyhow. That happened because interest rate was abysmally low, and banks decided to use that opportunity to extend credit to everyone, including those who shouldn't have been given that opportunity. But that happened because Kahl-Stegall law was modified that allowed banks to originate credit and not to keep it. Initially, when banks extend loans to people, they keep that on their balance sheet. But because of financial engineering, those crazy mathematicians, if you like to call them like that, banks were then lending money and they were then packaging those receivables, selling them as securitization. And then that one got to a level where they decided to repackage securitized loan, and they put them into another package called CDO. And then they repackaged CDO again. Then we got CDO of CDO, or CDO squared. And they were all like a pack of cards. If the foundation was shaky, everything would not be sustainable. That is, if the original borrower for property happens not to be able to pay back, then those who have CDO and CDO squared will lose that. That was a lapse in the regulation, and that is being corrected now under Volcker rule and under Basel III agreement. It's been addressed. And another question, you were talking about why not have equity loan. Yes, we have that already, and it is up to individual. If you want to share in profit, you call it equity financing, whatever. If you want to share in profit, then you are called a shareholder. That's it. You are a shareholder, and you share in profit, and you share in loss. But I don't want to be a shareholder. I want to be a lender. And I don't care what you do with that money, just give me my fixed return. So there's nothing wrong in that. At least you have options, and you're able to build a portfolio. If you were to be rich, like if you were to get £1 million, you could put 500,000 into equity, and you could put 500,000 into bond market. So if one is doing well, the other one might be going down. At least you have something to fall back onto. So you have a portfolio. So there's nothing wrong in having equity finance. We have it already. And you also have debt financing, which is a bond or credit or loan, whatever. So they all create avenue for diversified investment. And they go to a very great extent to enrich our capitalist system. They allow for diversification, which is very, very fantastic. Then next question.
No, that was it.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Right. Jamal, gold also goes up and down.
The young lady raised a very good point, and that is that I'm not saying something new here, and that is that the gold standard, in fact, the Islamic approach is a gold and silver standard. And that was worked for millennia. We're talking hundreds of years, and not only in the Islamic system, but in many other societies. We had a form of that up until 1971 under the Bretton Woods Agreement. So it is not something new, it's something actually fairly recent. But the point is that as a commodity which has a value in itself, whether industrial or jewelry or other areas, silver and gold are very stable. What you used to buy something like livestock hundreds of years ago in gold is the same price today. So that gives you a tremendous amount of stability. It also takes away from the policymakers, it takes away from the governments, takes away from the banks, the ability to debauch the currency. And this is one of the points that Keynes actually raised. One of the worst ways to subvert your economy is to enable them, let them to debauch your currency, and that's what they're doing. So giving them this open check to go out there and print as much money as they like, whether it's open market operations, whether it's credit creation, whether it is fractional reserve banking, whether it's quantitative easing, it's the same thing. It's printing more and more money that they don't have. And we, the public, are the ones that suffer from that. So gold, silver do vary a little bit up and down, but far, far less than this paper fiat currency, which is generally constantly and rapidly devaluing, and particularly in the crisis that we're in at the moment. This is something that you may not have noticed so much now, but you're going to notice a lot in the next 10 years, believe me.
Gentleman in the second row, and then the gentleman 3 rows behind him.
Thank you. It's been an interesting debate so far, and I've been interested to read all the literature that's been provided. I just wanted to ask Mr. Harwood a very brief question. You propose a new economic system, which is very interesting, and I can't say I'm an economist, so I can't really say if it's a good thing or a bad thing. The means that you would bring that system to fore, would they be peaceful or not peaceful?
Okay.
Peaceful.
Okay, so I've been on your website and I've found this. Oh, Muslim armies teach the Jews a lesson after which they will need no further lessons. March forth to fight them, eradicate their entity and purify the earth of their filth. That's the 2010, June 2010, a press release, Hizb ut-Tahrir media office.
Okay.
Do you condemn that or not?
No, because this is you have to distinguish. You have to distinguish between a war and a non-war. So please let me finish. And you are misquoting that. Let me finish your
website.
Let me finish. You've raised your point. Let me
We've had
answer
the question. I want the answer, and then I want no more questions.
There is a
You
war.
get the answer, and then I want no more questions.
There is a war going on in Palestine.
This ill.
There is a war going on in Palestine because that's the reality.
Can I
Because
just say, I'm
the reason
Jewish, and it says teach the Jews a lesson.
No, I'm talking about Palestine.
This is not what this is talking about.
Listen, let me answer your question, and then I will give you a chance to come back. But listen, I'm saying that Palestine is occupied land, and there is a war going on. This is why people talk about a peace process, because there is a war going on. So, in the same way that politicians talk about war, whether that is Iraq or Afghanistan or elsewhere in the world, a war is a war. So that is a description of a war. So if you want to take
Jim feels like I can come back.
Sorry, no, I want to stop this now.
Jim feels like I can come back.
Well, I don't want to.
Well,
This is.
I've got one more point, and I promise you, if you believe
Is it about economics or is it about politics?
You're a lecturer here. Do you believe in intellectual honesty?
Pardon?
Do you believe in intellectual honesty? You're sharing a platform with people like this. There are 12 million Jews in this world.
Sorry,
That's my view, and I promise you I'll finish. I think it's important to say there are 12 million Jewish people in this land, and it's not just in this world, not just Jewish people that are being talked about here. It's gay, gay people. I'm going to finish. I'm going to have my words. It's important that you finish.
Excuse me, this is the economics debate. Everyone here is attending for economics.
If you read the
Everyone here is attending for economics. If you want to raise these points, Jamal, he goes to many events and he speaks about Palestine, Israel, many events. So either you stay and listen and ask questions on economics, or you go to another event, organised by yourself. We gave out a report on both arguments. This is the end. This is the end.
Yet again, the Zionists are having a disproportionate amount of airtime for the number of
We've got many questions.
I'm Jewish, and I've been living my whole life. And there's 12 million Jews who live on this planet.
This is the economics event. You spent over a month advertising. Now you're spoiling it. You're spoiling our event.
You want to wind the rest of them out.
Okay, can you stop spoiling our event?
If anyone that is interested in intellectual honesty, and now I'm going.
The gentleman.
Thank you. So an economics question. My question is actually to Dr. Sholarin. This is in relation to the issue that, look, we have enough regulation to solve some of the financial crises which are happening. Now, when I look in history, every time we see this cyclical fluctuations, every time there is a bust, the regulators always come in and say, yes, we have new regulation and we'll fix this problem now. And they paint the picture as if the future is going to be bright. And unfortunately, I see a pattern, and even this applies now, that the regulators have come in and said, yes, we have new regulation and we fixed the problem. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem to guarantee that there isn't going to be a similar proportion or a bust or a depression of a similar magnitude in the future. So the question is, have the regulators actually solved the problem?
I don't think we have a regulation that can solve all the problems that we have. But what I want to propose to you is that we have enough regulation in place to curtail them and to minimize their negative impacts. We are in a global village, and then everything we do is being influenced by the actions or inactions of our competitors. So you never can predict what will happen in China and what will happen in North Korea, and then new oil wells being discovered, and countries or companies merging together. All those things, they create volatility and uncertainty. And then they can easily distort whatever regulations we might put in place at a particular time. What we need to be doing is to be dynamical and to be monitoring the events and to be responding as we move along. Well, we have managed to outlive the subprime oil crisis. Now we are having sovereign debt crisis. So no one foresaw that, but we are trying to deal with it. So we have Volcker rule, we have Basel III, we are trying to deal with it. And in our attempt to deal with it, I am not happy with what I will refer to as over-regulation. Occasionally, the government will come out too heavy-handed to the extent that they will stifle proper economic activities in their attempt to control or curtail crisis. So they should be even-handed and they should look very, very deeply. And that is what I want to say. Thank you very much.
Now, I saw some hands on this side of the room, and I would like to get some questions from this side of the room. But before I do, is it on topic? Is it about economics? Okay, please go ahead.
So today's International Women's Day, celebrating the increased role of women in the economy and equalisation of gender roles in society. Women under an Islamic system are denied the basic freedoms to respect. They're expected to stay at home, bring up the family rather than go out to work. Surely this has a negative effect on the economy when practically half the population is expected to just stay at home.
It's a good question. Under an Islamic system, will women be allowed to work?
It's a very good question, and let me answer it. First of all, I believe that the Islamic system says, recognizes that there are differences between men and women. And I actually believe that it gives most of the privileged positions to women rather than men. Men have an obligation to work. Men have an obligation to support their parents, their family, their wives, their children. They don't have a choice in that. Men have an obligation to do all of those things, there's no question. Woman has a choice of getting married or not getting married. A woman has the choice of working or not working. So the question is, the choice, if a woman decides that she wants to get married, in the relationship in the home, the man is given a certain responsibility as being the primary breadwinner. The man and the woman can choose between them that both of them would work. They could choose that the woman would work. They could choose that, that's the thing. But the matter is, generally speaking, in the Islamic family unit, the woman would focus upon raising the children. And beyond that, maybe when the children are older, as my wife is an example, my wife works now that my children are older, it's her choice. She has a choice in that. I have an obligation to work and to provide, but she has a choice. So many people have taken this and tried to distort it and say that Islam treats the woman unfairly compared to the men. Whereas I would say that, I don't know, let's take a thing of hands here, of the Muslim women in the audience. Are there Muslim women here that believe that they get a bad deal in Islam, or that they believe that Islam actually gives them a fair deal in terms of the rules? Because that's the bottom line. That's the bottom line, because the Muslim women in this audience are quite young. You know, they're thinking, they're alive, they're education. You know, do they feel that women are oppressed in Islam? I mean, this is a valid question.
Okay. Yes, the gentleman in the red shirt. Now, is your question about the topic of today's discussion, or is it tangential?
Yeah, no, well, feel free to veto it if you let me speak.
Well, you can answer my question. Okay, go ahead.
I just want to say first for the chair, when you mentioned about students and how it was a lot less students going to university a while ago, and there's a lot more now and you can afford it. I don't think education should be a commodity. Capitalism seems to think that everything is commodity. Education, you know, whatever it is. I don't think commodity. I don't think education, as well as healthcare, transport, housing. I don't think those are commodities. And if you think about it, more students going to university will be more professionals creating wealth. For Jamal, I'd like to know a little bit more about accumulation of capital, because it's been a great discussion, but it's been very technical. I'm not an expert on economics. I'm an Arabic student, and I just, I'd like to know a little bit more about, you talk about the gold standard, which doesn't mean a lot to me, to be completely honest. If it's a gold standard, a silver standard, or any standard. But now I'd like to know about exploitation of workers. That's my main issue with capitalism. Our workers, what they compare with it. How much can one person earn? Are we going to have millionaires and billionaires still? Is there accumulation of capital, like, regardless, like it is today? And I'd like to, if you don't mind, I know it's not economics related, but human rights, I think is important.
Okay, all right.
And
that's enough, I think. Yeah. Let me deal with the question you addressed to me about my comment about fees. All I was saying was it's much easier to provide free university education when only 3% of the population are doing it. It's much harder when 50% are doing it. That's the only point I was making.
There's wealth, there's money. 7 billion bankers' bonuses.
Yeah, I'm not arguing with you about it. All I was saying was it's a lot easier to do it.
Okay, easier.
It was a lot easier to do it 40 years ago. That's the only point I was making. Now you're asking Mr. Harwood about capital accumulation.
Again, a very good question, and I'll answer it very briefly. First of all, Islam does not have anything wrong per se with capital accumulation. It encourages business. it encourages ownership. And as a result of that, you could own a big factory. There's no problem with the means of production or these things. You can own a big factory, a big business, etc. However, the more wealth you accumulate, the more tax you'll be paying. So, for example, zakat is 2.5% of your unused wealth, which is not circulating every year. That goes to poor, indebted, people in poverty, travelers, and so on. So that is an incredible wealth redistribution mechanism. It's unheard of in the world, but 2.5% of this wealth is being redistributed every year to these categories of the poor people. And that led to a situation where in Islamic history there were many times in which whole countries and regions just didn't have any poverty because the zakat was plentiful and it was redistributed to the poor people. Secondly, exploitation of workers. Again, the Islamic Sharia laws on this are very clear. You cannot exploit workers, that people, whether you're male or female, of an advanced age or a young age, whatever the job you're doing, you have to be paid a fair wage. And the notion of exploiting people just because they come from Asia or because they're 12-year-olds and they're sewing Nike footballs, this type of thing is not acceptable in Islam. You have to be mature to work, and in the work you have to have a defined wage, and that wage will be reviewed by the state if there's complaints about it being exploitative. So within this realms there is a lot of legislation against that. The last thing about human rights, yes, there is human rights in Islam, and those rights are what we call the accumulation of the whole of the Sharia laws. It's a big subject. I won't want to go into all of it here and now, but in essence, everybody has to comply with the law. And one of the main points of that law is that you cannot impinge on anyone else's rights, whether that is your neighbor, whether is that somebody that you're trading with or you have a business relationship, or whether that is the government and the government's relationship. So, for example, torture, rendition, trial detention without trial. All of these basic human rights are completely forbidden in Islam, and they do not happen, and they're not allowed to happen. Obviously, sadly, we live in a world where most of the Muslim countries are under dictatorships. I know it's beginning to change, but it hasn't changed yet. Many of these dictatorships have been, you know, the leading lights in terms of, and Dr. Sholarin probably knows the worst one, is Uzbekistan. The worst countries in terms of abuse of human rights. But Islam forbids these types of abuses and is very clear on those matters, that you cannot detain somebody without trial, you cannot torture somebody, you cannot impinge on their basic right to life, and so on.
No, I'm afraid we're drawing to the end of the evening now. I'm going to ask Dr. Sholarin, because he's been somewhat neglected in the last several minutes. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to respond to some of these comments.
Thank you. Yeah. I heard someone said education wasn't a commodity, and that's it. I think education is a commodity. What is being offered is skill. What is being offered is skill. So you procure education the way you buy a bottle of water. And then if you are going to pay for this bottle of water, then you must pay for acquisition of that skill. However, we have problem with education and student loan, in the sense that, take for example, if you borrow money to buy a house and you cannot pay back that money, then they can repossess your house. That is straightforward and it is easy. But if a young man here has managed to acquire an educational skill and is unable to pay for it, eventually, maybe from borrowed funds, and is unable to pay for it, we cannot go into his brain and remove that skill. That is the problem we are having. And this thing is being researched and it is being looked into. So I want you to understand that. And on the issue of zakat, I'm not a scholar in Islamic studies, although I respect your views here. But the issue here is that zakat redistributes. And it redistributes in the same way as taxation system redistributes. Those who are working are meant to pay tax, and corporate entities are meant to pay tax. And that is being used by the government to take care of those who are jobless and those who are in need. This one differs from one country to another, and the rate of taxation also is not uniform. So there is a similarity there between zakat and taxation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sholarin. I would like to thank both speakers this evening. They've I think it's been very informative and entertaining. I would like to thank the audience. You provided some challenging questions. I'm sorry we couldn't take all of them, but we have come to the end of the evening. Maybe the level of interest is an indication that we should be having more such debates. But I'm going to hand over now to a representative from Global Ideas to close the event.
45 minutes rather than just because some people have made a point and now finishing early.
So yeah, we're ending the event as it's been 2 hours and you've all waited half an hour patiently. So first of all, I'd like to give a... No, it was meant to end half an hour, about 7:30. So the event was meant to start at 5:30 and end at 7:30. But obviously we're actually finishing half an hour late. So apologies for that. But first I'd like to thank Dr. Jafar Al-Murad for chairing the event. So hopefully everyone can round of applause. And again, second for both our speakers for attending and giving great presentations and answering as many questions as they possibly could. And lastly, I'd like to thank you all for attending tonight's event. Hopefully it will be on YouTube. It was all on live stream, by the way. We had several viewers watching, but hopefully for the next time we'll publicise it even more, so many more people will watch in the other room and stuff. There's food upstairs, there's Subways, and there's other snacks and things like that. They're all free, obviously, so you can continue the discussion upstairs. Or any questions I want answered, maybe the speakers will be about to answer.